Welcome to a tour of our 2022 budget. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that the fiscal year goes from July 1 to June 30th, but even though half the budget year is in 2021, we still call this the 2022 budget. Now, budgets can be hard for some of us to interpret, and government budgets are a different animal anyway. So I got a couple of people to help me. Councilman Dave Pratt is the liaison to our Finance Committee, and Chris Helvey is our Finance Director. They both went over this with me, and I'll use this video to share some of the main things I learned. The first thing is this yellow highlighting. You'll see it in several places. These are just items the mayor marked so she could discuss them with the City Council in more depth during their meeting. All those highlighted items are in these first 3 pages, which are the main operational budget for the city. So let's start with that. The first section is revenue, all the money that comes in. Here's the total. Next, we see all the expenditures, all the money that goes out. Here's that total. And finally, we have the change in net position. That's the difference between how much comes in and how much goes out, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Now, on the right side, we have these 4 columns. This one shows how much we ended up spending last year, although you'll sometimes see that won't be completely up to date. Next, we see how much we've spent so far this year. This report was actually printed before the start of this fiscal year, and that's why this column is all zeros. This column shows a budget amount proposed by city employees, and finally, here we see the budget amount the mayor actually decided on. Notice this says Mayor's Proposed Budget. That's because this budget isn't necessarily finalized. We'll have a Truth and Taxation hearing this month, and then a final City Council vote will be required to adopt the budget. Okay, let's look at revenue. How much money will the city take in? These are all the different money sources, things like taxes, license and permit fees, intergovernmental revenue is the money we get from the county and the state, charges for services the city provides, and so on. So we estimate our total revenue for 2022 to be $1,763,219. We'll see why that's significant if we skip down to the bottom line of our expenditures. You may have noticed before that they're exactly the same amount as our revenue. They have to be, because state law requires a balanced budget. The change in net position is 0. So how did we make that happen? Let's go back to revenue. Notice here the mayor's asking for $35,000 more in property taxes than what was proposed, and that's why we'll be having a Truth and Taxation hearing this month. Then down here she's asking for an appropriation of fund balance of a little over $277,000. That's money from the city's savings account, so that's how much money is required to balance our budget. And by the way, not all that money is actually going to be spent. Some of it's going into other city savings accounts. We'll see that in a minute. Okay, so now let's look at expenditures. It'd take too long to cover everything, so I'm going to focus on the things that I hope are going to be of the most interest. Here we have administrative salaries and wages. These pay our office people. Now, you might remember that one of the projections from the budget retreat in March was a $70,000 to $80,000 increase to handle grandma information requests related to legal action against the city. Fortunately, that increase didn't turn out to be necessary, but let's look at what did happen. Last year, we spent $133,000 on administrative wages. What doesn't show on this printout is what was budgeted for last year. That was $93,000. So the City Council had to make an adjustment to cover about $40,000 more. A portion of that was related to legal action, but there were other things too. The city's growing and so is the workload, so part of that $40,000 went to pay time and a half overtime to get everything done. This year, we're budgeting $126,000 so we can afford to hire a new part-time assistant recorder. That way there's more manpower to get things done, we avoid paying overtime, and hopefully save money over what we spent last year. Our bond interest is going to go up $16,000 this year. This is the bond for our roads, and the interest was less last year because we didn't start paying on the bond till partway through the year. By the way, this shows up here instead of under roads because this is considered a loan expense, not a road expense. This is the line for attorney's fees, and that was another big increase projected during the budget retreat. Now, here it helps to know the city's history with legal services. For a long time, we got them free through the Utah League of Cities and Towns. But as we grew, 2 things happened. Our free attorney retired, so we lost his services. And at the same time, legal issues got more complicated. So we started hiring paid counsel. And we adopted an initial default amount of $30,000 a year for legal fees. But some current legal needs have bumped up these costs substantially. And to be clear, they aren't specifically tied to the current court complaint, but mostly to issues related to it, an ongoing neighbor dispute and resident concerns over ordinances. And then there are always developer issues and general consultation. Anyway, last year the actual costs were about $55,000. But in the final months of the year, fees were averaging around $12,000 a month. That would have projected out to $144,000 for this year, but the mayor settled on $132,000. That's another of our big budget increases. Under public safety, this looks like a huge increase for police services, but it's not. We also budgeted $92,000 last year. This is low here because they hadn't billed us for everything by the time this budget came out, and that's not unusual. We'll see more of that. But as our finance director told me, they haven't billed us, and I'm not begging for it. We find the same thing here under fire equipment. The budget this year is $45,000. Last year it was the same, but we've bought equipment that we just haven't been billed for, so this figure doesn't reflect everything we spent. Under roads, we have a line for wages, and it looks like, whoa, somebody got a big raise. But no, you have to understand how it works. The salaries of our public works people actually come out of 6 different accounts. One in roads, one in snowplow, there's fire, enforcement, parks, and water. That's because they do work in all 6 of these areas. So what we want to look at here is roads and water. We typically budget about $110,000 in wages for each of those. But last year there was a lot of road work done by outside contractors for the water line upgrade, so our people didn't do as much on roads and they were under budget. This year we thought they'd be doing more with the roads. So if we look at the water budget, we pulled about $20,000 from there and took it down to $90,000, then added that $20,000 to roads and brought it up to around $130,000. Actually a little more planning for overtime and things like that. So that's how all that balances out. Last year we also budgeted more than we spent on street maintenance. We budgeted $30,000, the same as this year, but we only spent $2,000, again because all the outside road work that was done for the water upgrade. Under street capital outlay equipment, the employees asked for $168,000, but the mayor only approved $29,000. That's because the larger figure included money to construct a public works building down by our salt shed, and the mayor decided to wait on that. Class C road maintenance looks weird, so this is another one that needs explanation. Class C road funds come to us from state gasoline taxes, and we can only spend them on roads. But snowplowing also counts as roads. So why did we spend just $149 in this category last year? Again, we had a lot of outside road work done for the water upgrade, so we moved a lot of this Class C money to other places. Part of it went to snowplowing and salt, and another big chunk we just carried over to this year. Snowplow wages are up over last year. They were lower last year only because we had lower than average snowfall. Under snowplow capital outlay, we go from $12,000 last year to $44,000 this year. This is to buy a salt loader for our snowplows, which is a big expense up front, but it's going to save us money down the line. That amount also pays the lease on 2 of our snowplow trucks. Parks and trails looks like a big increase, but this $5,000 is low. We actually budget $10,000 a year for the park. We just didn't spend that much last year. And if we go back and look under miscellaneous revenue, there's a $10,000 donation we got for the park this year, so that doubles our budget and gives us about $20,000. Now, at the end of the budget, we have some things called transfers. This is money we're going to move into savings accounts for future purchases and repairs, things like emergency medical services, roads, and parks. We have a 5-year lease on our snowplow trucks, so if we put away $5,000 every year, by the end of the lease we'll have $25,000 toward a new truck. And our main fire truck is nearing the end of its life, so we've been trying to put away money for that every year. But the past 2 years we couldn't because of some other big expenditures. So this year we're transferring $50,000 to make up for that. That's another big increase in this year's budget. Now, most of the pages at the end of the budget are to show those transfers we just talked about. Let's look at them. Page 5 is for fire. Then we have EMS, snowplow, parks, and roads. Now for roads we have a bond, and so here we're showing what we spent bond money on last year. Most of it was for the repair on Northview Circle. Now this looks like we ended up about $300,000 in the hole, but we didn't. Our bond was for $500,000, so we actually have about $200,000 left, and we're carrying that over. It's just that we can't show that money in this year's budget because we received it last year. Finally, 3 of these pages at the end need more explanation. Page 4 is for the flood mitigation project. All that money was spent last year, so there's nothing for that in this year's budget. Page 10 is for water, and it's entitled Enterprise because water kind of acts like its own business. It has to be self-sustaining, and we can't use any property taxes for it. So there's a section for income and one for expenses, just like in the city's operational budget. By the way, some cities boost their water fees and use that profit for general city revenue. Woodland Hills doesn't do that. Last but not least, page 11 is for sewer, which is also an enterprise fund. The city collects most of that money as income, but then passes it directly onto Payson because we use their sewer system. We do end up with a slight profit to help cover our overhead costs. So those are some things we hope will be helpful in making sense of our 2022 budget. You might have other questions, and if so, any of our city council members would be happy to answer them. Just give them a call or send an email.